The three that have gone before have all been from a person with a disability, and each from a different perspective of what that person needs to thrive in the workplace. So I know those of you who've attended the other three, many of you have given some fantastic feedback about those, and those recordings will be on the website soon so that we can share those, because lots of people are asking for that. So that's great. My name's Jason Diedrich. I'm the General Manager of APM Communities, and I'm also the lead of APM's Employee Resource Group for staff with disability, illness or injury. As you can see, we've got people joining us from around the country today. I am on Gadigal land today in the North Sydney office, so I acknowledge the Gadigal people as the traditional custodians of these beautiful lands and waters around Sydney Harbour. You can get a glimpse of it out the screen to Ben's right there. Yes, Ben's right. Yes, I'm looking in the video camera, getting it around the wrong way. But a beautiful, beautiful area. I found a fascinating story about the Gadigal people always being very principled in the way they do things. And back in 1938, the authorities tried to coerce a group of First Nations people here on Sydney Harbour to do a reenactment of the landing of the first Europeans to arrive, and they were required, the First Nations people, to be the retreating Aboriginals, and the Gadigal people refused, despite the fear of retribution and despite the threat of retribution that was given, but they refused to participate in that because they felt that was not appropriate, even back in 1938, which I think is fantastic. But instead, the authorities had to recruit some Indigenous people from a regional mission where they coerced them instead. So, but showed that they stood their ground. Globally, APM recognises the importance of Indigenous peoples in all the communities that we serve, but also in our workforce here at APM. So we'd like to acknowledge their role there. As many of you know, I'll talk to anyone who'll listen about diversity. I'll even talk to people who won't listen quite often as well about diversity and its importance and how it makes us stronger. And so I'd like to acknowledge anyone here in the room or anyone online today who is Indigenous, anyone from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, anyone who identifies as LGBTIQA+, or anyone with a disability. And of course, disability is what we're here to talk about today. And I'm delighted to be joined in the room here by Ben Johnston. International Day of People with Disabilities only 2 days away now, only 2 more sleeps, and so it's great to have Ben here to present for us today. So Ben's currently completing a traineeship in the infrastructure industry. He's visually impaired, having a condition called Norrie disease, which has left him completely blind since birth. Growing up, Ben wasn't sure what he wanted to do, but he knew it was somewhere in the business industry, business sector. Through his time working in the infrastructure industry, where he is now, he's worked in a number of offices across consultancy, government, and also with construction contractors. Through these experiences, he's had to overcome a number of challenges related to his vision impairment. And so with that knowledge and that awareness, he's going to share with us today his thoughts on what are the barriers in the workplace that are faced by people with vision impairment and how can we overcome them. Ben's presentation will probably go for 15 or 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have time for questions as well. So if you're here in the room, please, you can put your hand up and do things like that. When we get to that, if you're online, you can pop your questions in either the chat or the Q&A section, which I discovered exists the other day. I may have missed some questions in the first 2 presentations because I didn't know that was there. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Ben, and then we'll come back for questions at the end. Cool. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Jason. Before I commence, I'd just like to extend upon Jason's acknowledgement to country and acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging. So as Jason said, my name is Ben Johnston, and I'm here today to talk to you about what sort of barriers people face with a disability, most specifically a visual impairment, and also how these barriers are overcome. So as Jason also said, my name is Ben Johnston, 20 years old, currently completing a traineeship in the infrastructure industry. So I've worked in a fair few different offices over the last 2 years, so I've faced and overcome an amount of barriers. In recent years, organisations all over the country have started to recognise the importance of making everyone feel safe, included and comfortable in the workplace. As a result, the modern office has become more diverse in terms of gender, race, sexual orientation, and religion. However, we still have a long way to go when it comes to making the workplace more inclusive towards people with a disability. It is estimated that today 70% of people with a visual impairment remain unemployed, and this is due to a number of the barriers which I hope to bring to you today. So what are some of the barriers that people face with a visual impairment in the workplace? One of the biggest ones is negative employer and colleague perception. A study on the employer implicit attitudes by American Psychological Association found that most employers automatically connect competence with sighted people and incompetence with visually impaired people. This is due to a lack of exposure, possible previous experiences, and just a general lack of understanding. Now, for me personally, I've been very lucky that I haven't faced much employee and colleague negative attention and exposure, but it definitely has happened, and it's something that needs to be focused on. So how can this barrier be overcome? It's important, for the employers to not go into an interview or go into looking to recruit someone with previous experiences at the forefront of their mind. It's important to take individuals as separate. The second barrier that I'm focusing on today is travel. With businesses forever expanding, employees are often required to undergo some form of travel. This may be to a company's offices in a different state or country, or maybe just an external meeting with a client or stakeholder. Technology has advanced greatly, but in conjunction with the current infrastructure, it does not allow for a complete solo travel to an unfamiliar location for someone with a disability. Public transport can present its own level of challenges for those, especially for those that have lost their vision later in life. Navigating and feeling confident on public transport may require extra training. Now, this training is something that can be provided by external organisations such as Guide Dogs and Vision Australia. That's, the main way to overcome that barrier of public transport. It's important that everyone with a vision impairment does seek training to get to unfamiliar locations to ensure the safety for everyone. And for me personally, I try to get training by Vision Australia and Guide Dogs, who provide orientation and mobility services. I try to get that done every time I go to a new office, just to make sure I'm doing it the most efficient way possible. 3 takeaway tips that I have today. The biggest one is understanding the individual. Each individual person, whilst maybe having the same disability, reacts and adapts very differently to certain situations, including things like trip hazards, obstacles around the office, etc. It is important as the employer to understand how someone with a visual impairment operates and ensures that the office is as suitable for them as possible. Little things to focus on there. Obviously, hot desking for someone with a visual impairment is not the most beneficial thing. That's something I've found to be the biggest barrier in the workplace in some of the offices. With everyone moving every day, it's quite often that your team would be on another side of the office, or in some case on a different floor. So little things like that, and things like statues and obstacles on the floor. So it's important, with someone with a vision impairment to focus on an orientation around the office with someone who knows the general layout of the office and whether things are permanent or just there temporarily. And it's important that does happen within the first day or two of the person starting or moving different offices. Ensuring that the work and equipment used in the office is accessible. So this is a very big one in terms of productivity. So as you guys can probably tell, for the people that are sitting here in the room and hopefully on the camera, I'm using today a braille display. which is easier for me to read and talk at the same time. But most often in the workplace, I use a system called JAWS, which is job access with speech, which basically takes what's on the screen and puts it into a synthesized text format. There are also a number of things like Braille, I guess, which I'm using today. And that helps in a number of ways. That can be printed both on paper and on this device here, which I'm using in front of me, called the Focus 40. Important to recognise the importance of making everyone feel safe, included, and comfortable in the workplace. So that's just lost. Yeah. I just lost my spot.
Just while Ben's finding that, we might zoom in a little bit later to show you this device Ben's using as he moves from one line to the next. There's a whole lot of little silver buttons that pop up to create the braille that he's feeling along there. So once he scans one sentence, it changes to the next sentence. So these buttons pop up and down to create braille. I've never seen a device like this. I'm very impressed.
Thanks. Sorry for that. If the role requires travel, it is important to consult and in the understanding that of the needs of the role. So it's important to consult the employee to make sure that they understand what the role requires and make sure it's a good fit for them. That's definitely a barrier that I've faced in terms of travel. Obviously, working across fairly large organisations, there's definitely the possibility that travel would be required. So it's definitely a big thing to, I guess, bring into everything before the role commences. So little things like interstate travel can require various level of planning for someone with a disability. Things like getting to and from the airport, to and from the hotel, to the work location, and even little things like getting food can present a number of challenges for someone with a disability, with a visual impairment, depending on their vision loss. It is important for the employer to understand what the person will require to ensure that they can still complete the role to the best of their ability. In conclusion, visual impaired people do face a number of barriers when entering the workplace. However, we all have a part to play in knocking down these barriers and creating inclusive, functional, and productive workplaces. Thank you, everyone, for listening to my presentation, and I hope you've been able to take something away from it, implement into your workplaces. Thank you. If there's any questions, move over to that section.
Thank you, Ben. Can we give Ben a... So thank you for that. That was really, really powerful. Now I'm going to just, if you don't mind, bring the camera in so that people can see the device. They can see the device, and you can see hopefully you can see the little silver buttons there that pop up and down as Ben scrolls through his document, so that he can get a feel for the text. It's pretty amazing. There's already some comments in the chat here. A few minutes in, and I've already been blown away by the perspective Ben's provided. Thank you so much for organising this. The question is, what's the name of the device again?
So this one here is called a Focus 40. I believe it's made by Quantum. So there's a number of them out there, but I've just found this one to be the best one.
So it links to it can see a Word document and it converts it line by line to Braille.
Yeah, so it can, anything that's on the computer. So I can basically operate the computer from these, if you want to zoom back in. Okay. There's little buttons all along the bottom. And I can basically operate the computer from this if I wanted to.
Oh, okay. Very cool. Any more? So do we have any questions from the virtual audience or from here in the room? Yes, here in the room.
Yeah, so I'm Jen from Ashore.
Oh, hi, Jen.
Hi, thank you so much, Ben. I'm still stuck on the 70% of those with a visual impairment are unemployed. I'm wondering with the improvements in technology, like have we seen that shift, and do you think it's going to make much of a difference as we move forward? Because that's unbelievable.
Yeah, so I think that 70% is globally, but still a very high number. And I guess technology can only help to lower that. So hopefully, I guess in the next coming years, it does lower to sort of a normal-ish amount.
And there's lots of little things that employers can do to help change that, but even at APM, that's something we can do better and improve the process to get in place the technology. So if someone new starting and is needing that support, that we get that in place more quickly, and means they can get to being a productive employee more quickly and feeling valued in their roles. So there's certainly things that we can do in that space as well. And I'm saying that from experience with our own team, that we can certainly do that better. But it's those barriers that, or the perception that might be too hard, that means that employers aren't taking on people with disability or vision impairment. Hang on, we've got some new messages. All right, here's a question. Just make sure I haven't missed anything. Anna has asked. Sure, I haven't missed anything. Anna has asked: is there anything that vision able folks should or wished we knew, anything that you wished we knew, able-bodied or vision able? What's the correct term? People who can see. Anything that is said is helpful or that actually isn't. What do you wish we knew?
I'm not too sure with that one. I think a lot of it just comes down to, I think for me, the biggest thing, only working in the workplace for 2 years, the biggest thing I've found is I've always been, I guess, the first visually impaired person that supervisors and the company has actually had. So I think a lot of it is just being open-minded and, don't be afraid to ask questions. If you want to know something, you're only going to find out by asking. So I think that's probably the best advice I can give you. There's nothing really that you should or shouldn't know. It's just more around don't be afraid to ask questions and just, I guess, be open-minded if you do work with someone with a vision impairment. They obviously have their own ways of working and you can both learn a lot from each other.
Okay, great. The very lovely Flick has asked, how could the IT department engage with accessibility devices for staff from your perspective? Is it better to have a few standard items that people can choose from, or is it better to let each staff member decide what works for them? It seems like the way technology can help people is really subjective.
Yeah, it is. It is very subjective. There are a number of screen readers out there and a number of even braille devices and even certain like keyboards and laptops. I have heard that people with a vision impairment only like using a certain type of keyboard or a certain laptop. So it is a very subjective topic. I guess everyone has their own preferences. So it's probably one of those things that comes back to asking questions is have a bit of choice. For the person, they might not even want a braille display. They might just want JAWS, or they might want another screen reader. So definitely, I think for maximum productivity and effectiveness, there needs to be a level of choice for them.
Okay, great. Next question comes from Lisa. Thank you, Ben, for the very practical examples to help illustrate a point. The example, the impact of hot desking. Certainly that's something I hadn't thought of either. So that's a great one. Not just in terms of your own actual desk setup, but the impact of the workmates also being somewhere different each day and potentially not even on the same floor. So is that something you experienced firsthand?
Yeah. So wasn't too big of an issue finding a desk, but in terms of working with a team, that's kind of where the issues presented themselves. Because I often found myself sending them a Microsoft Teams message or something, and they might only be 3 seats over. But because it's different every day, it's one of those things. It's an unknown. You don't know if they're in the office working from home unless you ask them. So that's probably the biggest thing I found.
And you didn't want to just stand up and yell out across the office. Exactly. Is John here today?
Exactly right.
Fair enough, too. Fair enough. Any more questions online or here in the room? Yeah. Yes.
I was just wondering, when in doubt, do you offer help or do you look at for body language cues if a visually impaired person seek assistance, or do you prefer people to ask you if you need help, or?
Yeah, probably definitely ask. I think that's the best thing because you never really know. A lot of people do like myself do like to try get things done without help, or in terms of navigating, try work it out. But what isn't helpful is when people just kind of walk up to you, grab your arm, and go this way, go that way. So yeah, probably definitely ask before you do offer help, but definitely, yeah, I would say ask.
It's a good one, and it's a common one for many disabilities. People, people offer me help in the supermarket. I've got a prosthetic leg, and I should be right grabbing my 2-minute noodles off the shelf. Thanks, but the intent is positive, but people will just automatically help you sometimes, and that's that polite question: do you need any help, or is there something I can do to help? That's usually the best option. Is my experience on that as well.
Yeah.
More questions?
I just had one about change, actually. Ben, I'm Jen as well from ashore, which makes it a bit confusing. But our voices hopefully sound quite different. In terms of, you mentioned that the physical environment is really hard when there's changes and you don't know if it's a temporary or a permanent sort of fixture, whether it's a physical thing or where people are sitting. Is there anything else around change that could be managed differently?
It's one of those things that's very hard to manage, because obviously change could be something as small as a tissue box on a cabinet, or it could be as big as a building being put up on your walk to work. But in terms of I think consultation, just making the person aware is probably the best thing you can do for that. If something is, if, let's say someone's putting a statue up in an office, or a different row of desks or something like that, the biggest thing is just to let them know, hey, just let you know there's this going up here. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
And in terms of that's probably the best way, just consulting and making them aware.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a good point. I can see my colleague Jessie online. Jessie, you should know there's a whole lot of us coming to your office next week, so it's going to be much more crowded and noisy, so be prepared for that. Looking forward to seeing you then. Corinne has asked, how do you navigate your way to work?
Yeah, so coming back to that travel training point is what it's called, orientation and mobility. So basically before I start a new workplace, I'll engage companies like Vision Australia and Guide Dogs, and I'll go through a couple of training sessions. So for me personally, I get the bus from near my house, and then goes to in the city of Sydney, and then it's about a 15-minute walk. So it all just comes down, for me personally, it comes down to repetition, and doing that walk over and over with someone, and doing it the best way possible. And then from there, it just becomes second nature. You just know what to, because I guess I've done it all my life, so I'm kind of used to using the cane and stuff like that. So yeah.
Flick again asks, have you seen inclusion at a workplace done really well, and what did it mean for you?
I haven't seen it done bad. I've been very lucky that everywhere I've worked has been very inclusive and accommodating. So I probably can't answer that one because I've only worked in 3 companies. So I haven't actually seen any bad examples of inclusion. It's all been very positive for me.
That's good. That's a good thing. Lauren asks, are there any other negative interactions that can occur every day in the workplace that vision-able people should be aware of, and how can it be improved? So, particularly among other co-workers, things that happen that make it inadvertently, that make it more difficult for you.
I think just it's important. It's obviously recognising that bringing things like hand gestures when you're talking and body language, obviously we wouldn't necessarily pick up on. But that, and obviously just not saying things that could potentially offend someone, that would be the only negative thing that could come into it. But and yet again, I haven't actually had anything negative in the workplace, unless it's been a teaching thing that I've had to go, no, I can't do that. Or, for example, PowerPoint isn't overly accessible. So something would be like, I'd have to just inform them that PowerPoint wouldn't necessarily work that well for me, but that's probably the closest thing I've had to a negative interaction.
Okay. That's fantastic. Any other questions from in the room or online? No? Well, as I said, this is the final of oh no, we've got a late question coming in. What would be the better alternative to PowerPoint? Kate.
I think anything with slide, the problem with PowerPoint is a lot of it is visual.
Oh, the images in it.
Images,
Yeah.
yes. The actual text in it is readable by the program if you know how to use it. But it's more in the way that it's made, produced. So a lot of text, and same thing with Word documents. So things like text boxes, anything visual like images, words within an image, that all that sort of stuff isn't necessarily accessible. So if you were to produce a PowerPoint, just maybe produce a second one without images and maybe put descriptions in the slides.
And Eshni, this will be our final question. Eshni asks, I would love to hear your personal experiences on handling job interview questions around vision impairment.
So that one's an interesting one. When I was doing my job interview, and I can only sort of give my personal experience on that one, but when I was doing my job interview, I was sort of encouraged by a few people not to disclose my vision impairment until it came to the face-to-face interviews, obviously. And that comes back to those negative, maybe they're past experiences or something that the boss might, or the interviewee might have experienced with someone. So they said the easiest way, because you don't know the person, the easiest way is to just do the interviews and speak as well as you can. And then when it comes to the face-to-face, that's when you sort of, I guess, for me, I had to disclose it because I walk in with a cane. But that's, I guess, the advice that I had been given around job interviews.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ben. Can we give Ben another round of applause? It's been a great few weeks with these 4 presentations, and the participation from the groups has been better than we expected, and that's been terrific. Lots of really good questions, and one of the I guess common themes when I've tied it all together in terms of the questions asked and the presentations and what Ben and before him Ellie and Peter and the other Ben all presented on is that people with disability don't expect people without disability to have all the answers. They don't sort of come into a workplace and expect you to have it perfectly, but they do want respect while you work it out. And the key thing that we can all do in the workplace is, if we're approached by someone who discloses they have a disability, whatever that is, or if someone's seeking a workplace adjustment for that disability, the key thing we can do is to react positively. Even if we don't know how to do it, or even if we don't know what is possible, that initial reaction really counts. And you can humour me for a second. My sister just told me a story. She teaches horse riding and in Perth, and she has a student who has a hearing impairment, and she, as a courtesy, they went up to the judge of this dressage event to say this girl has a hearing impairment, and the judge's reaction was, well, what are we supposed to do now? Like this, that was like a physical and audible reaction. And it's that kind of thing that some people don't realise that they do, that will have a lasting impression on the person with disability. Where if you react positively, and it might just be, oh, okay, so what do you need? That will stick with that person. Even if you then don't know the solutions, or there's hiccups in finding the solutions, that person will know that they're supported. They'll know you've got their back. And that will make a difference to, as you both tread that path and try and find out what those solutions are. Because as we've identified, they're quite different for different people. So that's my tip of the day, is react positively and then sort out the problems later. Well, thank you, Ben, and those who've gone before you with the other presentations. We are getting recordings of all these presentations, and they will be on the APM website in the days to come. So it's been a fantastic build up to International Day of People with Disability. Thank you to those online for attending, particularly those who've attended multiple sessions, but also thank you to those here in the room in North Sydney. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you.